The spring of 2019 brought new hope to Cedar Falls, Iowa. The long winter was finally over, and people were ready to enjoy warmer days. For Jenny Gamez and Laura Simonson, it was supposed to be a perfect Friday night out with friends. Jenny was 24 years old and loved helping people. She was in her final year of nursing school at the local college. Her classmates often said she had the kindest heart they had ever known. Jenny lived in a small apartment on Maple Street, just 2 blocks from the college campus. She worked part-time at the hospital to pay for her studies and always dreamed of becoming a pediatric nurse. Laura was 26 and taught 2nd grade at Cedar Falls Elementary School. The children adored her because she made learning fun with games and songs. She had been dating her boyfriend Mark for 3 years, and they were planning to get married in the fall. Laura lived with her parents while saving money for the wedding. She was always the responsible one among her friends, the one who made sure everyone got home safely after a night out. The 2 women had been best friends since they met in high school. They did everything together. They went shopping, watched movies, and supported each other through good times and bad. Their friendship was the kind that everyone admired. Jenny was the adventurous one, always ready to try new things. Laura was more careful, but she trusted Jenny completely. On that Friday evening in March, Jenny had been excited all day. She had been talking to someone new on a dating app for about 2 weeks. His name was David, and he seemed different from the other guys she had met online. He was older, 32 years old, and worked in construction. Jenny told Laura that David was charming and knew how to make her laugh. Laura was not as excited about Jenny meeting strangers online. She worried about her best friend and always reminded her to be careful. But Jenny was confident and believed. She was a good judge of character. She had met several people through dating apps before, and nothing bad had ever happened. That evening, Jenny picked out her favorite blue dress and spent extra time on her makeup. She was hoping David might show up at Murphy's Tavern, where she and Laura planned to meet their college friends. Murphy's was the most popular bar in Cedar Falls. It was a friendly place where everyone knew each other, and the owners, Pat and Helen Murphy, treated their customers like family. Laura arrived at Jenny's apartment at 7:30. She wore a simple black top and jeans along with her grandmother's silver necklace that she never took off. Laura also wore her engagement ring, which sparkled under the apartment lights. She was excited to show it off to their friends as Mark had proposed just the month before. The 2 friends walked to Murphy's Tavern together. The evening was cool but pleasant, and they enjoyed talking and laughing as they made their way through downtown Cedar Falls. Jenny kept checking her phone, hoping for messages from David. She had invited him to join them, but he had not given her a clear answer. Murphy's Tavern was busy when they arrived at 8:47 in the evening. The security camera at the front door captured them walking in together, both smiling and looking forward to a fun night. They found their usual table in the back corner where their friends were already waiting. The group included 5 other people, from college and work. There was Beth, who worked at the bank, and her boyfriend, Tom. There was also Jake from Jenny's nursing program, and 2 teachers from Laura's school, Amanda and Chris. Everyone was in good spirits, celebrating the end of a long work week. Jenny kept checking her phone throughout the evening. She was texting with David, who finally said he might stop by later. Laura noticed her friend was distracted and asked if everything was okay. Jenny assured her that everything was fine and that she was just excited about the possibility of her friends meeting David. The group ordered food and drinks, talking about their plans for the weekend. Laura told everyone about the wedding preparations and how stressed she was about all the details. Jenny joked that she would probably never get married because she was too picky about men. Everyone laughed, not knowing these would be among the last conversations they would ever have with the 2 women. Around 10:30, Jenny received a text message that made her face light up. David was outside and wanted to meet her. She grabbed Laura's arm and asked her to come outside for a minute. Laura was hesitant because she was having a good time with their friends, but Jenny pleaded with her. She said she was nervous and needed her best friend there for support. The security camera captured them leaving their table and walking toward the front door. Jenny looked excited and kept smoothing her dress. Laura looked less enthusiastic but followed her friend anyway. This was typical of their friendship. Laura often went along with Jenny's plans, even when she had doubts. Outside Murphy's Tavern, They met David Thompson for the first time. He was tall and had dark hair. He wore jeans and a black jacket. Several witnesses later remembered seeing him because he seemed older than the usual crowd at Murphy's. He was polite and shook hands with both women, but there was something about him that made some people uncomfortable. David suggested they go to another bar across town that he said was more interesting than Murphy's. Jenny was eager to go, but Laura wanted to return to their friends inside. David was persuasive, though. He said he had his truck and could give them a ride. He promised they would only stay for one drink and then he would bring them back. At 11:30, the three of them left Murphy's Tavern together. The security camera recorded them walking to David's dark blue pickup truck in the parking lot. Jenny was laughing at something David had said. Laura walked a few steps behind them, looking uncertain but not wanting to abandon her best friend. Inside Murphy's Tavern, their friends waited for them to return. When an hour passed with no word from either woman, Beth tried calling both their phones. The calls went straight to voicemail. Tom suggested they might have gone to another bar, but Amanda was worried because it was not like Laura to disappear without saying goodbye. By Saturday morning, when neither Jenny nor Laura showed up for their planned yoga class, their friends knew something was wrong. This was the beginning of what would become one of Cedar Falls' most shocking crime stories. Saturday morning came with no sign of Jenny Gamez or Laura Simonson. Their yoga instructor, Kelly Williams, waited at the community center for 20 minutes before calling both women. When neither answered their phones, Kelly felt worried. Jenny and Laura never missed their Saturday morning class. They had been coming together for over a year and always arrived exactly on time. Maria Gamez, Jenny's mother, was the first parent to notice something was wrong. She lived in the next town over but called Jenny every Saturday morning. When her daughter did not answer, Maria drove to Cedar Falls. She used her spare key to enter Jenny's apartment and found it exactly as Jenny had left it the night before. The bed was not slept in, and Jenny's weekend clothes were laid out on the chair. Meanwhile, Laura's parents, Tom and Susan Simonson, were getting ready for church when they realized Laura had not come home. This was very unusual because Laura always told them when she planned to stay out overnight. They called her phone several times, but each call went straight to voicemail. By noon, they were calling all of Laura's friends. The friends from Murphy's Tavern were also concerned. Beth remembered how Jenny and Laura had left with the older man, and something about the situation felt wrong. She called the Cedar Falls Police Department at 2 in the afternoon to report that her friends might be missing. Officer James Parker took the initial report. He was young and had only been on the force for 6 months. At first, he thought the women might have just decided to extend their night out, but when he heard that both women had missed important commitments and were not answering their phones, he became more concerned. He promised Beth he would look into it right away. By Sunday evening, both families had filed official missing person reports. The case was assigned to Detective Mike Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran of the Cedar Falls Police Department. Rodriguez was known for his thorough investigations and his ability to stay calm under pressure. He had solved several difficult cases in the past and was respected by everyone in the department. Rodriguez immediately began reviewing the evidence. He visited Murphy's Tavern and spoke with Pat Murphy, the owner. Pat remembered seeing Jenny and Laura that night because they were regular customers. He also remembered the older man who had approached them outside. Pat said the man seemed out of place among the usual younger crowd. The detective's first major break came from the security cameras. Murphy's Tavern had cameras at the front door and in the parking lot. The footage clearly showed Jenny and Laura entering the bar at 8:47 and leaving at 11:30 with an unidentified man. The camera captured them getting into a dark blue pickup truck, but the license plate was not clearly visible. Rodriguez spent hours studying the video footage. He could see that Jenny appeared excited and willing to go with the man. Laura looked more hesitant but followed her friend anyway. The man appeared to be in his 30s with dark hair. He wore a black jacket and seemed to be doing most of the talking. The detective then began checking other security cameras along the possible routes from Murphy's Tavern. A gas station 3 blocks away had captured the same blue pickup truck driving past at 11:45. The image was clearer, and Rodriguez could make out part of the license plate. It started with the letters DT, followed by numbers he could not quite read. Rodriguez contacted the Department of Motor Vehicles to search for blue pickup trucks with license plates beginning with DT registered in Cedar Falls and the surrounding counties. The search returned 47 possible matches. This would require a lot of work, but it was the best lead they had. While Rodriguez worked on identifying the truck owner, other officers were investigating Jenny's dating app connections. Jenny's roommate from college, Sarah Mitchell, gave them access to Jenny's laptop. The police found Jenny's conversations with several men, including the one named David, who she had been talking to for 2 weeks. The dating app messages showed that David Thompson was 32 years old and worked in construction. His profile pictures showed a man who matched the description from the witnesses at Murphy's Tavern. In their conversations, David had seemed charming and interested in Jenny's nursing studies. He had suggested meeting several times, but Jenny had always chosen to meet in public places with friends around. Detective Rodriguez ran a background check on David Thompson and discovered he had a criminal history. Thompson had been arrested twice for domestic violence against former girlfriends. He had also been charged with stalking 3 years earlier, though the charges were later dropped when the victim moved away and stopped cooperating with police. The detective immediately obtained David Thompson's current address and vehicle registration. Thompson lived in a trailer park on the outskirts of Cedar Falls and owned a 2015 blue Ford pickup truck with license plate DT4729. This matched perfectly with what they had seen on the security footage. Rodriguez decided to visit Thompson's address early Monday morning. When he arrived at the trailer park, Thompson's truck was not there. A neighbor said she had not seen David since Friday night. This made the detective even more suspicious. Most people would be home on a Sunday night preparing for the work week. The detective obtained a search warrant for Thompson's trailer and truck. While waiting for the paperwork, Rodriguez interviewed Thompson's co-workers at the construction company. His supervisor, Bill Hansen, said Thompson had not shown up for work on Monday morning and had not called in sick. This was unusual because Thompson needed the money and rarely missed work. Hansen also revealed that Thompson had been acting strangely in recent weeks. He had been talking about meeting women online and had shown pictures on his phone to other workers. Some of the men thought Thompson's comments about women were disturbing, but they had not reported it to anyone. Rodriguez was building a clear picture of David Thompson as someone with a history of violence against women who had recently made contact with one of the missing victims. The detective knew that time was critical in missing person cases. The longer Jenny and Laura were gone, the less likely it became that they would be found alive. The search for David Thompson intensified as more police officers joined the investigation. Rodriguez coordinated with state police to watch highways and check motels in surrounding counties. He also issued a be-on-the-lookout alert for Thompson's blue pickup truck. By Monday evening, David Thompson had become the primary suspect in the disappearance of Jenny Gamez and Laura Simonson. The investigation was just beginning, but Detective Rodriguez felt they were on the right track. What he did not know was that they were already too late to save the 2 young women. The search for Jenny Gamez and Laura Simonson entered its 6th day on Wednesday morning. Detective Rodriguez had worked almost non-stop since taking the case, sleeping only a few hours each night at the police station. The entire Cedar Falls community had rallied together to help find the missing women. Volunteers searched parks, abandoned buildings, and wooded areas throughout the county. David Thompson remained missing, and his blue pickup truck had not been spotted despite the statewide alert. Rodriguez knew this was not a good sign. In his experience, when suspects disappeared along with their victims, it usually meant the worst had happened. But he kept this fear to himself and continued to tell the families they were doing everything possible to bring Jenny and Laura home safely. Robert Hayes was a 62-year-old farmer who owned 300 acres of land 15 miles outside Cedar Falls. He had been farming the same property for 35 years and knew every inch of his land. Robert had joined the search efforts on Tuesday, using his tractor to check remote areas that the walking volunteers could not easily reach. On Wednesday morning, Robert decided to check the wooded section at the back of his property. This area was thick with trees and had an old creek running through it. Robert rarely went there except during hunting season. As he walked through the woods with his dog Max, something caught his eye near a fallen tree. At first, Robert thought someone had dumped trash in his woods. People sometimes threw garbage on rural properties thinking no one would notice, but as he got closer, he saw a flash of blue fabric. His heart began to race as he realized what he was looking at. There, partially hidden under branches and leaves, was a woman's body. Robert immediately called 911 on his cell phone. His voice was shaking as he spoke to the dispatcher. Within minutes, police cars and an ambulance were racing toward his farm. Detective Rodriguez arrived at the scene 20 minutes later, along with the county coroner and forensic specialists. The area was immediately secured with yellow crime scene tape. Rodriguez could see that this was not just a place where someone had hidden a body. There were signs of a struggle, and it was clear that terrible things had happened in these woods. The detective felt sick to his stomach, knowing that two families were about to receive the worst news of their lives. The first body was identified as Laura Simonson by the silver necklace she always wore, the one that had belonged to her grandmother. She was found wearing the same black top and jeans she had worn to Murphy's Tavern 6 days earlier. Her engagement ring was missing from her finger, which Detective Rodriguez noted as potentially important evidence. 20 feet away, searchers found the second body. Jenny Gamez was still wearing her blue dress, though it was torn and dirty. Both women showed signs of having fought for their lives. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Wilson, arrived to begin her preliminary examination of the crime scene. Dr. Wilson was the experienced professional who had worked on many difficult cases, but even she was disturbed by what she saw. Both victims had suffered multiple injuries, and it was clear they had been attacked with extreme violence. The doctor carefully documented everything before the bodies were moved to the county morgue for full autopsies. The forensic team began processing the crime scene with great care. They photographed everything from multiple angles and collected samples of soil, leaves, and anything else that might contain evidence. Crime scene specialist Nancy Foster found tire tracks in the soft ground near where the bodies were discovered. The tracks appeared to match the type of tires used on pickup trucks. Detective Rodriguez walked slowly through the crime scene, trying to understand what had happened. He could see where the victims had been dragged from a clearing into the more secluded area under the trees. There were signs that someone had attempted to cover the bodies with branches and leaves, but animals had disturbed the scene over the past several days. About 50 feet from where Laura's body was found, Officer Kelly Barnes discovered something half buried under dead leaves. She called Detective Rodriguez over to see what appeared to be a piece of jewelry. Using tweezers, Rodriguez carefully removed Laura's missing engagement ring from its hiding place. The ring was covered in dirt, but appeared undamaged. The discovery of the ring told Rodriguez that this was not a robbery gone wrong. Someone had removed the ring from Laura's finger and tried to hide it, possibly planning to come back for it later. This suggested the killer was familiar with the area and thought he could return without being detected. As the forensic team continued their work, they found other important evidence. There were fabric fibers caught on tree branches that did not match the clothing worn by either victim. A distinctive black button was found near the creek, apparently torn from someone's jacket during the struggle. Most importantly, they found what appeared to be blood evidence on several rocks and tree trunks. The crime scene processing took most of the day. As evening approached, Detective Rodriguez knew he had to notify the families before the news leaked to the media. This was the part of his job he hated most, but it was his responsibility as the lead investigator. Rodriguez first went to the Simonson house to tell Laura's parents. Tom and Susan Simonson had been holding on to hope for 6 days, but the detective's expression told them everything before he said a word. Susan collapsed into her husband's arms as Rodriguez gently explained what they had found. The scene at the Gamez house was equally heartbreaking. Maria Gamez had been staying with friends in Cedar Falls since her daughter disappeared, barely eating or sleeping. When Rodriguez arrived with a victim's advocate, Maria knew immediately why they were there. She asked only one question: did her daughter suffer? Rodriguez could not bring himself to tell her the truth. Word of the discovery spread quickly through Cedar Falls. The community that had held onto hope for nearly a week was now faced with the reality that two beloved young women had been murdered. Flowers began appearing at Murphy's Tavern, and people gathered to comfort each other and share memories of Jenny and Laura. The focus of the investigation now shifted completely. This was no longer a missing person case, but a double murder investigation. Detective Rodriguez knew that David Thompson was almost certainly their killer, but now they had to prove it in court. The evidence from the crime scene would be crucial in building their case. As Rodriguez left the crime scene that evening, he made a silent promise to Jenny Gamez and Laura Simonson. He would not rest until their killer was brought to justice. The hardest part was over for the victims, but for their families and the investigative team, the real work was just beginning. The discovery of Jenny and Laura's bodies changed everything for Detective Rodriguez and his team. Now they had a crime scene with physical evidence, and they could focus their investigation on building a case against David Thompson. The detective knew that finding Thompson was only half the battle. They needed solid evidence that would convince a jury beyond any reasonable doubt. Dr. Patricia Wilson completed the autopsies 2 days after the bodies were found. Her findings confirmed what Rodriguez had feared. Both women had been stabbed, multiple times with what appeared to be a large hunting knife. They had also suffered severe head injuries from being struck with a blunt object, possibly a rock or a metal tool. The doctor determined that the attacks were brutal and prolonged, suggesting the killer had taken his time. The autopsy results also revealed something else important. DNA evidence was found under Jenny's fingernails, indicating she had fought hard against her attacker and managed to scratch him. This DNA would be crucial if they could match it to a suspect. Laura's autopsy showed similar defensive wounds on her hands and arms, proving both women had tried desperately to defend themselves. While the medical examiner worked, Detective Rodriguez obtained search warrants for David Thompson's trailer and truck. Even though Thompson was still missing, Rodriguez needed to gather evidence from his home. The detective had a feeling that Thompson might be hiding somewhere nearby, possibly planning to return when he thought the investigation had moved on. The search of Thompson's trailer revealed a disturbing picture of a man obsessed with violence against women. In his bedroom, investigators found a collection of violent movies and magazines. Hidden under his mattress was a journal filled with detailed descriptions of his fantasies about hurting women. The entries became more specific and violent in recent weeks, right around the time Thompson had started talking to Jenny online. Detective Rodriguez read through the journal entries with growing horror. Thompson had written about following women home from bars and watching them through their windows. He described detailed plans for kidnapping and torturing victims. Most disturbing of all, the final entry was dated the day before Jenny and Laura disappeared. In it, Thompson wrote about finally having the courage to act on his fantasies. The search team also found Thompson's computer, which contained even more evidence. His internet history showed he had been researching remote locations around Cedar Falls, including the area where the bodies were found. He had also been looking up information about how long it takes for bodies to decompose and how to avoid leaving DNA evidence at crime scenes. On Thompson's computer, investigators found photos of dozens of young women. Some were clearly taken from social media profiles, but others appeared to be secret photos, taken without the women's knowledge. Several photos showed women leaving bars or walking alone at night. The police realized Thompson had been stalking potential victims for months before he finally attacked Jenny and Laura. The breakthrough in finding Thompson came 3 days after the bodies were discovered. A motel clerk in a town 50 miles away called police after recognizing Thompson's picture on the news. The clerk said a man matching Thompson's description had been staying at the motel since Saturday night, paying cash and keeping his truck parked behind the building where it could not be seen from the road. Detective Rodriguez led a team of officers to the motel. They surrounded the building before dawn and arrested Thompson without incident. He was found sleeping in his truck in the parking lot, apparently preparing to leave. The arrest was anticlimactic after such an intense investigation, but Rodriguez was relieved they had caught him before he could hurt anyone else. Thompson's truck provided the most important physical evidence. The forensic team found bloodstains in the truck bed that matched both victims' DNA. They also discovered Laura's purse hidden under the passenger seat and Jenny's distinctive silver bracelet in the glove compartment. These items proved that both women had been in Thompson's truck, contradicting any story he might tell about never meeting them. The fabric fibers found at the crime scene matched Thompson's black jacket perfectly. The missing button from the jacket was found to be an exact match for the one discovered near the creek where the bodies were found. Even more damning, Thompson had scratches on his arms and face that were consistent with the defensive wounds found on both victims. When Detective Rodriguez first interviewed Thompson, the suspect tried to deny everything. He claimed he had never met Jenny or Laura and suggested that someone was trying to frame him. Thompson said he had been camping alone in the woods for several days and had no idea why his truck would contain evidence related to the murders. However, Thompson's story began to fall apart when confronted with the overwhelming evidence. The DNA under Jenny's fingernails matched Thompson's perfectly. His cell phone records showed he had been in the exact area where the bodies were found on the night of the murders. Most importantly, his own journal contained detailed descriptions that matched exactly what had happened to the victims. Prosecutor Lisa Martinez was assigned to handle the case. She was known throughout the state as one of the most skilled prosecutors in violent crime cases. Martinez had never lost a murder case in 15 years of practice. She reviewed all the evidence with Detective Rodriguez and felt confident they had built a strong case. The evidence against Thompson was overwhelming. They had physical evidence placing him with the victims, DNA evidence proving he had fought with them, and his own written confessions to planning similar crimes. Martinez knew that Thompson's defense attorney would try to create doubt in the jury's mind, but she believed the evidence was too strong to overcome. Thompson eventually hired attorney Robert Klein to defend him. Klein was experienced in defending murder cases and was known for his aggressive tactics. He immediately began challenging the evidence collection and suggesting that Thompson was being railroaded by police who were under pressure to solve a high-profile case. As the case moved toward trial, both the prosecution and defense teams prepared their strategies. Martinez focused on the overwhelming physical evidence and Thompson's own written words proving his guilt. Klein prepared to argue that the evidence was circumstantial and that Thompson was being framed by the real killer who remained free. Families of Jenny and Laura waited anxiously for justice. They had endured the worst experience any parent could face, and now they hoped the legal system would hold Thompson accountable for destroying their daughters' lives and their own. The trial of David Thompson began on a cold Monday morning in September 2020. The courthouse in Cedar Falls had never seen so much attention. News reporters from across the state filled the courtroom, and hundreds of people gathered outside hoping to get a seat. The families of Jenny Gamez and Laura Simonson sat in the front row, holding hands and preparing to hear the terrible details of what happened to their daughters. Judge William Harrison was assigned to oversee the trial. He was known for running an orderly courtroom and had handled many serious criminal cases during his 20 years on the bench. Judge Harrison understood the intense public interest in the case, but he was determined to ensure Thompson received a fair trial despite the emotions involved. Prosecutor Lisa Martinez stood before the jury during her opening statement. She was calm and professional as she outlined the case against Thompson. Martinez told the 12 jurors that the evidence would prove beyond any doubt that Thompson had planned and carried out the brutal murders of 2 innocent young women. She promised to show them DNA evidence, physical evidence, and Thompson's own written confessions to planning similar crimes. Defense attorney Robert Klein presented a very different story to the jury. He admitted that Thompson was not a perfect person and had made mistakes in his past. However, Klein argued that being a troubled person did not make Thompson a murderer. He suggested that the real killer was still free and that Thompson was being used as a scapegoat because police were under pressure to solve the case quickly. The first witnesses were Jenny and Laura's friends who had been with them at Murphy's Tavern that night. Beth Williams testified about how excited Jenny had been about meeting David and how reluctant Laura had been to leave with him. Her testimony was emotional, and several jurors wiped away tears as she described the last time she saw her friends alive. Tom Peterson, the bartender at Murphy's Tavern, identified Thompson as the man who had approached Jenny and Laura outside the bar. Tom said he remembered Thompson clearly because he seemed out of place among the younger customers. The bartender also testified that Thompson had been watching the two women from across the street before approaching them. Kevin Walsh, a customer who had been leaving the bar at the same time, testified that he had seen Thompson convince Jenny and Laura to get into his truck. Kevin said Laura appeared hesitant and kept looking back at the bar, but Jenny seemed willing to go with Thompson. This testimony was important because it showed the jury exactly how Thompson had gained control over both victims. Detective Rodriguez took the witness stand for an entire day, walking the jury through every step of the investigation. He explained how they had tracked Thompson through the dating app messages, the security camera footage, and the license plate identification. The detective's calm, professional testimony helped establish a clear timeline of events leading to the murders. The most powerful testimony came from the forensic experts. Nancy Foster, the crime scene specialist, showed the jury photographs from where the bodies were found. The images were disturbing, and Judge Harrison warned spectators that anyone who could not handle the evidence should leave the courtroom. Foster explained how the physical evidence at the scene pointed directly to Thompson as the killer. Dr. Patricia Wilson, the medical examiner, provided detailed testimony about the autopsies. She explained that both women had fought desperately for their lives and had suffered terribly before dying. The doctor's testimony was clinical and factual, but it painted a horrific picture of the victim's final moments. Several jury members looked away as she described the extent of the injuries. The DNA evidence was presented by forensic specialist Amanda Foster. She explained how skin cells found under Jenny's fingernails matched Thompson's DNA perfectly. The odds of the DNA belonging to someone else were less than 1 in several billion. Foster also testified about the blood evidence found in Thompson's truck and how it matched both victims. Perhaps the most damaging evidence was Thompson's own journal. Prosecutor Martinez read selected entries to the jury, showing how Thompson had fantasized about kidnapping and murdering women. The entries became increasingly detailed and violent in the weeks before the murders. The final entry, written the day before Jenny and Laura disappeared, described Thompson's plan to finally act on his fantasies. Michelle Carter, Thompson's former girlfriend, provided crucial testimony about his history of violence. She told the jury about how Thompson had threatened to kill her several times during their relationship. Michelle described how he would follow her to work and watch her apartment from his truck. Her testimony helped establish Thompson's pattern of stalking and threatening women. Defense attorney Klein tried to discredit the evidence by suggesting that Thompson had been set up by the real killer. He argued that someone could have planted the victim's belongings in Thompson's truck and that the journal entries were just fantasy, not plans for actual crimes. Klein also suggested that the DNA evidence could have been transferred innocently during a brief meeting at the bar. Klein called several character witnesses who testified that Thompson had never shown violent behavior toward them. His former boss said Thompson was a reliable worker who had never caused trouble on job sites. Klein tried to paint a picture of Thompson as a lonely, troubled man who wrote disturbing fantasies but would never actually hurt anyone. However, the defense strategy fell apart during cross-examination. Prosecutor Martinez systematically destroyed each defense argument with facts and evidence. She showed that the physical evidence was too extensive and consistent to have been planted by someone else. The DNA evidence alone was overwhelming proof of Thompson's guilt. The prosecution's rebuttal witnesses were devastating to the defense case. Police officers testified about finding Thompson hiding at the motel and his attempted escape when arrested. The motel clerk described how Thompson had paid cash and tried to keep his truck hidden, behavior consistent with someone fleeing from a crime. Thompson himself never took the witness stand. His attorney advised him against testifying because Martinez would have been able to question him about every detail of his journal entries and past behavior. Klein knew that Thompson would not be able to convincingly explain away the evidence against him. The closing arguments took place on a Friday afternoon after 3 weeks of testimony. Martinez summarized the overwhelming evidence against Thompson, from the DNA under the victim's fingernails to his own written confessions to planning similar crimes. She asked the jury to hold Thompson accountable for the brutal murders of 2 innocent women who had trusted him. Klein made one final attempt to save his client by arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and that doubts remained about Thompson's guilt. He asked the jury to remember that they must be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, and he suggested that questions remained unanswered about what really happened that night. The jury received their instructions from Judge Harrison on Friday evening. They would begin deliberations on Monday morning, carrying with them the responsibility of deciding whether David Thompson would spend the rest of his life in prison. The families of Jenny Gamez and Laura Simonson could only wait and hope that justice would finally be served for their beloved daughters. Monday morning brought nervous energy to the Cedar Falls courthouse. The jury began their deliberations at 9 o'clock, while families and community members waited anxiously in the hallways. Tom and Susan Simonson sat quietly in the victim's family room, holding hands and praying for justice for their daughter Laura. Maria Gamez paced the floor, unable to sit still as she waited to learn the fate of the man who had killed her daughter Jenny. The jury deliberated for 8 long hours. During this time, they carefully reviewed all the evidence presented during the 3-week trial. The foreman, a retired school principal named Robert Mitchell, led the discussions as the 12 jurors examined each piece of evidence against David Thompson. They looked at the photographs from the crime scene, reviewed the DNA test results, and read passages from Thompson's disturbing journal. The jury had little trouble reaching their decision. The evidence against Thompson was overwhelming and consistent. Every piece of physical evidence pointed to his guilt, and his own written words had confessed to planning exactly the type of crime he was accused of committing. By late afternoon, they had reached unanimous verdicts on all charges. At 5:15 in the evening, Court Clerk Janet Stevens announced that the jury had reached their verdicts. Word spread quickly through the courthouse, and the courtroom filled within minutes. Judge Harrison called the court to order and asked the defendants to stand as the verdicts were read. The jury foreman stood and delivered the verdicts in a clear, steady voice. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Jenny Gamez, they found David Thompson guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Laura Simonson, they found Thompson guilty. On additional charges of kidnapping and sexual assault, the jury found Thompson guilty on all counts. As each guilty verdict was read, Thompson showed no emotion. He stood silently beside his attorney, staring straight ahead as his fate was sealed. In contrast, the families of the victims wept with relief that justice had finally been served. Maria Gamez collapsed into the arms of her sister, overwhelmed by the emotions of the moment. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause from community, members who had followed the case closely. Judge Harrison quickly restored order and thanked the jury for their service in such a difficult case. He scheduled the sentencing hearing for the following week, giving both sides time to prepare their arguments about Thompson's punishment. The sentencing hearing brought even more emotion to the courtroom. Prosecutor Lisa Martinez argued that Thompson deserved the harshest possible punishment for his brutal crimes. She reminded Judge Harrison that Thompson had shown no remorse for his actions and had put the victims' families through the additional trauma of a lengthy trial instead of accepting responsibility for his crimes. Defense attorney Robert Klein argued for life in prison rather than the death penalty, claiming that Thompson's troubled childhood and mental health issues should be considered as mitigating factors. Klein presented testimony from Thompson's family members about his difficult upbringing and history of depression. However, the most powerful presentations came from the victims' families. Maria Gamez spoke first, describing how Jenny had dreamed of becoming a pediatric nurse and helping sick children. She told the court that Jenny's murder had destroyed not only her own life, but had also prevented Jenny from saving the lives of countless children she would have treated as a nurse. Tom Simonson spoke on behalf of his family about Laura's impact on her students and her excitement about her upcoming wedding. He described how Laura had always seen the best in people and had trusted Thompson because it was her nature to believe in others. Tom said that Thompson had not only taken Laura's life, but had also destroyed the family she would have created with her fiancé, Mark. Judge Harrison listened carefully to all the testimony before announcing his sentence. He described Thompson's crimes as among the most brutal and senseless he had encountered in his 20 years on the bench. The judge noted that Thompson had shown no remorse and had forced the victims' families to endure a painful trial instead of accepting responsibility for his actions. Judge Harrison sentenced David Thompson to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each murder charge, to be served consecutively rather than concurrently. This meant Thompson would never have any chance of freedom and would die in prison. The judge also imposed additional sentences for the kidnapping and assault charges, though these were largely symbolic given the life sentences. Thompson was immediately taken into custody and transported to the state maximum security prison, where he would spend the rest of his life. As he was led away in handcuffs, Thompson finally showed emotion for the first time during the trial. He appeared to realize that his life was over and that he would never again experience freedom. The conviction and sentencing brought some measure of closure to the families, but they knew their lives would never be the same. Maria Gamez established the Jenny Gamez Memorial Scholarship Fund to help nursing students complete their education. The scholarship was awarded annually to students who showed Jenny's same compassion and dedication to helping others. Tom and Susan Simonson channeled their grief into advocacy work focused on dating app safety. They worked with technology companies to improve identity verification processes and with law enforcement to better track online predators. Their efforts led to new laws requiring dating apps to conduct more thorough background checks on users. Laura's fiancé Mark Williams struggled deeply with survivors' guilt and grief. He eventually became a counselor specializing in helping families cope with violent crime. Mark said that helping other families heal gave some meaning to his terrible loss and honored Laura's memory of caring for others. Detective Mike Rodriguez reflected on the case as one of the most challenging and important of his career. He credited the community's support and the forensic evidence for making the conviction possible. Rodriguez said the case reinforced his belief in the importance of thorough police work and never giving up on behalf of victims and their families. The case had a lasting impact on Cedar Falls and the surrounding area. Murphy's Tavern became a gathering place for people to remember Jenny and Laura, with their photographs displayed permanently behind the bar. The annual Jenny and Laura Memorial 5K run raised money for victim advocacy programs and brought the community together each year to remember the two young women. The dating app where Thompson had met Jenny implemented new safety features including better identity verification and warning messages about meeting strangers. The company also funded research into detecting potentially dangerous users through their messaging patterns and behavior. 3 years after the trial, David Thompson attempted to appeal his conviction, claiming his attorney had not provided adequate representation. The appeal was quickly denied by higher courts, which found that Thompson had received a fair trial with competent legal representation. Thompson remained in maximum security prison, where he was expected to spend the rest of his life. The story of Jenny Gamez and Laura Simonson serves as both a tragedy and a reminder of the importance of community, thorough police work, and never giving up in the pursuit of justice. Their families continue to honor their memory through advocacy work and scholarships, ensuring that some good comes from a senseless act of evil. While nothing could bring back Jenny and Laura, their families found some comfort in knowing that Thompson would never hurt anyone else. The case demonstrated that even the most brutal crimes could be solved through careful investigation and that justice, though it comes too late for the victims, can still be served for their families and communities.